The Sonoran desert holds no secrets. It burns them. It calcines them until they are reduced to dust and memory. It turns them into white bones under a sun that knows no mercy. It is an ocean of sand and silence that devours everything. But sometimes, a secret is so dense, so heavy, that not even the desert can erase it. It clings to the earth. It remains, hidden in plain sight, beating in the stillness like a heart buried alive, beating silently for decades, 30 years, until someone, by accident or by fate, stumbles upon it. And when they pick it up, they unleash a horror that was better left forgotten. I am Matteo Del Valle, and this is Forbidden Reality. Today we're not going to delve into the darkness of a cartel, nor into the mind of a serial killer. We're going to talk about silence. A silence woven with the threads of the most possessive love and the quietest madness. The story of 3 sisters who were erased from the world by a blood pact made in childhood. A promise whispered to their mother that became a cage without bars, and of a system that, upon finding them, did not know how to free them. Instead, it broke them in a much deeper, more irreparable way. I ask you to subscribe to this channel, to share this story, not for me, but for them, so that their silence, which lasted 3 decades, becomes a cry that no one can ignore again, so that their existence, denied by fear and then destroyed by bureaucracy, remains engraved in our collective memory. This is what the desert tried, in vain, to hide. Ricardo Valenzuela was new to the National Search Commission. He was 28 years old and had an almost naive faith in justice. He believed that technology, drones, and satellites were the new eyes of God, eyes that could find the lost, the disappeared. He had joined the commission after his neighbor's 16-year-old son disappeared. He saw the pain of that mother, the maze of offices, and the indifference. And he vowed that he would make a difference. His work was monotonous, frustrating, hours and hours in front of a high-resolution monitor, analyzing grid by grid the satellite images of the north of the country, looking for anomalies, earth movements, clandestine graves, makeshift camps, scars on the skin of the planet that betrayed a human tragedy. Most of the time, he found nothing, only empty vastness. Until one Tuesday afternoon, a slow day, weighed down by the heat. He found something, in the middle of the absolute nothingness of the Great Altar Desert in Sonora, more than 100 kilometers from the nearest road. A world away from any town, a dot, a small rectangle that shouldn't be there, a human construction. He zoomed in. The image was pixelated, but the shape was unmistakable. A roof, walls, it wasn't on any map. He checked the land registry, nothing. The topographical records, nothing. The agricultural records, a blank. That house, legally, did not exist. But there it was, an impossible stain on the ochre immensity, an affirmation of existence against all odds. He felt a pang of curiosity, an electric shock. He took the image to his superior, Director Morales, a career man in his 50s, his shoulders slumped under the weight of thousands of files. Cynicism was his armor. Morales looked at the screen over his glasses. His eyes showed no interest, only fatigue. "A satellite error," he said, his voice thick. "A mica reflection on the rock, or an abandoned drug ranch. Forget it, Valenzuela. It's not our concern." Ricardo insisted. He felt an urgency he couldn't explain. "Sir, I've reviewed the images from the last 10 years. The dot is always there, and there are no roads leading to it. There are no registered water wells, Whoever lives there is completely isolated or dead. Morales sighed, the sound of bureaucracy defeating enthusiasm. "Rookie," he said, almost pityingly, "learn to pick your battles. We have 2,400 active files in this state. Families calling us every day. Names, surnames, photos. We're not going to divert resources and send a team to hell for a stain on a photo that could be anything." He leaned back in his chair, which groaned in protest. "We have a budget, Valenzuela. We hunt clues, not ghosts on a screen." "Leave it at that. That's an order." But Ricardo couldn't leave it at that. That image was burned into his mind. That lonely rectangle in the middle of the void was calling him. It was a silent scream, a question that demanded an answer. For the next 2 weeks, that image haunted him, in his dreams, while he was eating, while he was trying to talk to his girlfriend. It became an obsession. In his spare time, he immersed himself in the archives. He searched digital newspaper archives for reports of missing persons in that specific area. He spoke to retired police officers. He found nothing. It was a ghost. A ghost house inhabited by ghosts. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. The uncertainty was worse than any possible truth. He made a decision that violated all protocols, a decision that would change his life and the lives of others. He asked for a few days off. "Family matters," he lied. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He filled up the tank of his old Ford pickup truck. He bought gallons of water, canned food, and a first aid kit. And one morning, before dawn, he drove into the heart of the desert to find a house that officially didn't exist. He was going to knock on the door of oblivion. The heat was a solid, palpable wall. The truck's air conditioning struggled, humming like a wounded animal, to keep the hell outside at bay. The thermometer read 100 degrees. The paved road, a lonely black ribbon, turned into a dirt road. And the dirt road soon became a simple trail in the sand, barely visible. He drove for hours, guided only by his phone's GPS and his obsession. The landscape was hypnotically beautiful and terrifying. Saguaro after saguaro stood tall like silent sentinels of a forbidden kingdom. The sun bounced off the sand and blinded him. The silence was so deep that his ears hurt. At one point, the truck's engine coughed. It overheated. He had to stop. Wait. Sitting in that absolute solitude, he felt fear for the first time. A primal fear. The feeling of being an insignificant speck of dust about to be wiped away. He was about to turn around, to obey Morales, to return to his safe life. But then he looked at the photo on his phone, the small rectangle, and he knew he couldn't. Finally, he saw it. In the distance, a shaky silhouette in the hot midday air. The house, it was made of adobe, old, cracked by decades of sun and wind. It looked more like a geological formation than a human construction. It blended in with the color of the earth, a perfect camouflage. He parked the truck about 200 meters away. The silence was absolute. Total. Not even the buzzing of an insect. Not even the chirping of a desert bird. Only the beating of his own heart, which sounded like a drum in his ears. He approached on foot. With each step, his boots kicked up a small cloud of dust as fine as talcum powder. The house was surrounded by a fence made of dry ocotillo branches intertwined with rusty wire. Inside, there was a small, parched vegetable garden. A few tomato and chili plants struggled to survive. A few skeletal chickens pecked apathetically at the ground. Everything had an air of abandonment, of time standing still, of waiting. He reached the door. It was made of old mesquite wood with no knob or lock. He knocked. The sound of his knuckles against the wood rang obscenely loud in the silence. No one answered. His heart pounded in his throat. He knocked again, louder. "Hello? Anyone there? I'm Ricardo Valenzuela, from the Search Commission." "You have nothing to fear." Silence. The door wasn't locked, just ajar. He pushed it gently. It creaked like a groan. The interior was dimly lit. The air was thick and still. It smelled of accumulated dust, dried herbs, and something else. Of stale loneliness, of contained life. When his eyes adjusted to the darkness, the world came crashing down on him. There was no furniture, not a chair, not a bed. Just a few tattered mats on the hard-packed earth floor, a rough wooden table in the center, some clay pots on an extinguished stove, and on the adobe walls, drawings made with charcoal, children's drawings, suns, moons, stars, and figures of girls holding hands, always three. And then he saw them, in the darkest corner of the only room, huddled together, 3 figures, sitting on the floor, hugging each other, forming a single trembling entity. They were women, or what was left of them. Their hair was long, gray, and tangled. They wore simple clothes made of raw blanket material, patched 1,000 times. Their skin was sickly white, almost translucent. The skin of someone who hasn't seen the sun in years, in decades. They looked up at the same time, as if they shared a single nervous system. 3 pairs of eyes, large, frightened. The eyes of a wild animal caught in the headlights of a car. They said nothing. They didn't scream. They just stared at him. An empty stare, without understanding. Ricardo felt a chill run down his spine, despite the suffocating heat. "No, I'm not going to hurt you," he stammered, raising his hands. "I just want to help." One of them, the oldest, stepped forward protectively. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. A sharp, unpracticed movement. Ricardo took a step forward. And that's when he saw their hands. All 3 had their hands clasped together with desperate force. And on each of their thumbs, a scar, identical. A small, pale, old mark in the shape of a crescent moon, like a ritual burn, a mark, a shared stigma. Ricardo instinctively stepped back. He bumped into the doorframe. The air stuck in his lungs. It felt thick, impossible to breathe. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. The taste of dust and fear was a bitter metal on his tongue. This was not simple voluntary isolation. This was something else. Something much older, deeper, and darker. "You shouldn't be here," whispered the older woman. Her voice was a rustling of dry leaves, a sound that hadn't been used in years. "You broke the circle. You broke the pact." "What pact?" asked Ricardo, his voice barely audible. The woman pointed to the drawings on the wall with a nod of her head. Then she pointed to herself and her sisters. "The blood pact," she said, each word seeming like a monumental effort. "The promise to the mother." Her sisters nodded in unison, a ghostly movement. No one comes in. No one goes out. Never. The story of the Solano sisters was no mystery. It was a forgotten tragedy, buried under layers of bureaucracy and time. Their father, Elias, was a miner in Cananea, a strong, loud man, full of life. He died in 1991, in a cave-in, a poorly supported beam, a safety measure that the company ignored to save a few pesos. The mining company gave his widow, Isadora, a miserable compensation, an amount that was an insult, delivered in an envelope by a man in a suit who did not look her in the eye. They patted her on the back and gave her a veiled warning not to make any noise, not to look for lawyers. For Isadora, the world collapsed along with that mine. It became a hostile place, a predatory monster that had taken her husband away from her, that had deceived her, that had discarded her. Her immense pain festered and turned to fear. And her fear, fueled by loneliness and resentment, blossomed into a consuming paranoia. She began to see danger everywhere, in her neighbor's gaze, in the schoolteacher who wanted to talk to her about her daughters, in the television, which only showed violence and sin. The outside world was the enemy. One day, without telling anyone, she made a radical decision. She sold the small house she had in the village. With that money, she bought a piece of vacant land deep in the desert. A place no one wanted, a place no one would go, a place where she could build her own fortress against the world. And she took her 3 daughters with her. Luna, 12, the protector; Sol, 10, the dreamer; and little Aurora, just 7, who only wanted to play. She took them out of the world. She kidnapped them from their own lives. He told them that outside there was only death, sin, and bad men like those who killed their father. He told them that the world they knew had ended in a silent apocalypse that only he had seen coming. That only they, his pure bloodline, would survive. One night, under the full moon in the desert, with the cold wind as her only witness, she held a ceremony. She lit a fire. With a small obsidian knife that had belonged to her grandmother, she cut her thumb. Then, with the same knife, she made an identical cut on the thumb of each of her daughters. Luna did not cry. Sul trembled. Aurora moaned in pain and fear. Isadora mixed the blood of the 4 in a clay cup, and she made them drink it. "This is the blood pact," she told them, her eyes feverish. "We swear by the blood of our blood that we will never separate, that we will never speak to strangers who are demons in human skin. We swear that we will die here, together, pure in our sanctuary. No one comes in, no one goes out." That was the day the Solano sisters ceased to exist for the world. They grew up in that universe of adobe, silence, and fear. Their only window to the outside world was an old, worn, yellowed copy of the Bible. Isadora taught them to read with it, to sow, to cultivate the land. But above all, she taught them to fear, to hate everything that came from outside. Isadora died 15 years later. A fever, a stomach infection, something that a simple pill could have cured. They buried her under the largest saguaro cactus, the one that looked like a man with open arms. And the sisters, now women in their 20s, were left alone, trapped, not by physical walls, but by a pact made with blood in childhood, by fear engraved in their souls, by a toxic and protective love that had made them prisoners of themselves. 30 years of identical sunrises and sunsets, of shared silences, of an existence reduced to survival and loyalty to a ghost. This was the universe that Ricardo Valenzuela had desecrated. This was the secret he now carried with him as he drove like a madman back to civilization. A heavy secret, burning, like the desert sun chasing him in the rearview mirror. He didn't know that the real desert, the most arid and cruel, was just beginning. The desert of bureaucracy, Ricardo arrived at the commission's office in Hermosillo at dawn. He was covered in dust, his eyes red from exhaustion and emotion. He entered Director Morales' office without knocking. He dropped the photos he had taken with his cell phone on the desk. Photos of the house, of the sisters, of their terrified eyes, of the identical scars on their thumbs. "Their names are Luna, Sol, and Aurora Solano," said Ricardo, his voice hoarse. "They disappeared in 1991. I found them. They've been there for 30 years. Their mother kidnapped them. They need help. Now." Morales looked at the photos. Then he looked at Ricardo. His expression was not one of compassion, not even surprise. It was one of deep, utter annoyance. "Valenzuela," he said, massaging his temples as if trying to stave off a migraine. "I gave you a direct order. Do you know the legal and media problem you've just created?" "I saved 3 women," Ricardo replied, incredulous. "No. You've opened Pandora's box," Morales snapped, banging on the table. "You violated protocol. You acted on your own. Now we have to involve the prosecutor's office, human rights, the state diff, the federal diff, papers, meetings, press conferences. Is that what you wanted, rookie? To be on the news? To be a hero?" Ricardo's heart sank into a pit of ice. There wasn't a shred of concern for the women. Only for the procedure, for the inconvenience, for the scandal. The machine started up. Slowly, heavily, noisily. A convoy of federal vehicles entered the desert the next day. It wasn't a rescue. It was an invasion. Agents in bulletproof vests and assault rifles surrounded the small adobe house, as if they expected to find an army, not 3 fragile, terrified women. They were dragged out by force, screaming, crying, scratching, clinging to each other as if their lives depended on it. The pact was being broken by force, and the sound was that of their souls being torn apart. Ricardo watched from afar, a feeling of nausea and guilt burning in his stomach. He had caused this. In his attempt to help them, he had thrown them into the jaws of a monster far colder and more methodical than their mother. They were taken to a hospital in Hermosillo. They were placed in a psychiatric ward. They were separated. They were dressed in hospital gowns that smelled of chlorine. They were drugged to calm them down. And the bureaucratic parade began. Ricardo tried to talk to the psychologist in charge, a woman named Ramirez, a woman in her 40s with an impeccable suit and an impenetrable gaze. He found her in a sterile hallway, reviewing a folder. "Doctor, please, they need special treatment," Ricardo pleaded. "You can't separate them. They have to be together. It's the only thing they know. It's their only anchor." Dr. Ramirez didn't even look at him. She continued reading her report, turning the pages with a dry click that echoed in the hallway. "Agent Valenzuela," she said, her voice monotonous and emotionless, like someone who has repeated the same speech 1,000 times. "The protocol is clear. Individual psychiatric evaluation, Form 7C. Each one is a separate case with a different file number. We can't do group therapy until an individual diagnosis is established and a shared psychotic disorder, or folie à trois, as you probably know, is ruled out. But they're not individual cases. They're a symbiotic unit, 30 years together," protested Ricardo, feeling despair rising in his throat. "The law does not recognize symbiotic units. It recognizes individuals with individual rights," the doctor concluded. "Furthermore, protocol recommends separation to break patterns of pathological dependence. It's for their own good. The system wasn't looking to heal. It was looking to classify. It was looking to apply the same formula to all forms of human pain. It was looking to break down horror into manageable, fileable pieces. Ricardo felt dizzy. The smell of hospital disinfectant turned his stomach. Can I at least see them? I found them. Maybe my presence. You are not a direct relative, interrupted the doctor, closing the folder with a sharp snap. You are not authorized. Please direct any requests in writing to the hospital address, filling out Form F117 for patient access. Have a good day, officer. She turned and walked away down the hallway. The sound of her heels was like a hammer driving the last nail into a coffin. Ricardo was left alone, leaning against the cold, white wall. He felt dirty, complicit. He had betrayed them. He had promised to help them, and he had handed them over to this, to a maze of protocols and forms where their souls didn't matter. The desert house was a prison of love and fear. But this new prison, with its white walls and the smell of disinfectant, was infinitely more cruel. It was a prison of indifference. The epilogue to this story is written with the ink of the system. The Solano sisters were separated permanently, for their own good. Luna, the eldest, who tried to protect the others, was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and severe anxiety disorder. She was transferred to a high-security psychiatric hospital in Jalisco, far from everything she knew. Sul, the middle sister, the quiet one, sank into a catatonic depression. She spends her days sitting in a chair at a social services center, staring at a blank wall. She doesn't speak. She doesn't respond. The caregivers say that sometimes her lips move, as if she were praying. Aurora, the youngest, the one who still had a spark of life in her eyes, took it the hardest. The separation destroyed her. She suffered such severe panic attacks that she had to be kept under almost constant sedation. Her body is there, but her mind is gone. The pact that kept them alive, united, and functional in their own universe for 30 years, was broken by the system in less than 3 months. Ricardo Valenzuela resigned from the search commission a month after the rescue. He left his badge and his letter of resignation on Morales' desk. He didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. Today, he works as a tour guide in Baja California. Sometimes, when he looks at the immensity of the desert, he feels the wind whispering something to him. The adobe house was demolished by order of the state government. The official reason was health risks and to prevent it from becoming a morbid tourist attraction. The truth is that the system, like a criminal, erased the crime scene. It eradicated the physical evidence of its own incompetence and cruelty. Today, at that point in the Sonoran desert, there is nothing left. Only sand and the wind, which sometimes, if you listen very, very carefully, seems to whisper 3 names: Luna, Sol, Aurora. The voices of a pact that was not broken by a stranger who entered, but by the cold and efficient machinery of a world that took them away, a world that didn't know what to do with them, other than destroy them in the name of the law. I'm Mateo Del Valle, and I'll see you in the next Forbidden Reality.